Welcome back. So this next session is a panel, your opportunity to ask questions of some very experienced people in the Magento community. So I'd like you to give a warm welcome to James Cowie, Ben Marks, Vinay Kopp and Ian Cassidy.
Let's get ready to panel! That sounded funnier in my head.
You're going to have to run around, aren't you? Yeah, I'll come over here. Just realised we've got mic. I'm going to have to give a mic to...
Oh.
Yeah.
Gabby gets what Gabby wants.
So I've got a couple of seeder questions here before we open it to, I'm sure, plenty of questions that can be thrown this way in the audience. Okay. What is your least favourite and most favourite change with Magento 2? Who wants to take that first?
Testing for both.
I think for Community Edition for Magento 2, having a full-page cache out the box is actually really, really good. When you start to look at the differences between Community and Enterprise for Magento 2, it kind of started to blur the lines a little bit, but I know from the roadmap for Magento 2 that's coming out, we're going to start seeing more sort of investment in Enterprise to try and, pull that away from Community Edition.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult to answer. One of the parts I'm really excited about, but I haven't worked with yet, is the AMQP integration in Enterprise. I'm really excited to do something with that. That's awesome. I like the whole object manager dependency injection pretty much because that's rock solid and just kind of works. My least favorite part, I guess, so far has been the complexity of the front end and so many moving parts, and it's just something I'm not that familiar with, and that scares me a little bit. But after Ian's talk, I'm actually looking forward to starting maybe digging into it. We'll see.
Yeah, I think I've not quite found anything that I don't like yet, other than the initial learning curve when we got given a project and told to deliver it in a few weeks. But no, Sorry. Yeah, merchant beta fun. But the dependency injection and testing has definitely made working on Magento 2 a lot more fun.
Okay, should we start getting people engaged in the audience? Just start raising hands if Gabby can run round.
Hi guys. One of the things I heard was Magento is going to be having some more B2B functionality in, I don't know if it's in Enterprise or both, that's coming up in 2.1 or 2.2, et cetera, et cetera. Could you shed any light on that?
I'd been talking about this for a while, and then all of a sudden someone said, wait, you can't talk about that. And I'm like, but there was like an entire, like the product manager for business-to-business module did a presentation in New York. But since I think it was mentioned at Imagine, unless I was imagining it, pardon the pun, yes, we absolutely, we have a module coming out, and as far as I know, the ultimate answer for product questions, of course, lies with the product team. It's a separate module. It's actually not attached necessarily to a version per se, and it will be, again, from what I understand at this point, it'll be an add-on. It'll be an add-on to your system, and I believe specifically to Enterprise. But essentially, we're just taking a look at some of the common business requirements that exist that sort of make B2B different from B2C. I mean, if you built B2B with Magento, especially like Magento 1, then there are just sort of certain approaches in Magento 1, things like price indexing is probably the big one, that make it sort of an opportunity for creativity, I'll say, right? So those are some of the problems, some of those common problems we're trying to solve with M2 B2B.
Any other questions out there?
Oh, yeah. Do you want this one?
Can't see what's going on.
But by the way, we can't see a thing up here. It's like we were being interrogated.
You are. Okay, I'll... people.
There's an audience!
Hey, people. What is your local development setup? Vagrant, Docker, something else?
Yeah, so at the moment we're using Vagrant. We've actually got a little script for when we set up a store, so we can type in what the project name is, and that'll scaffold out like a Puppet manifest, so we can run a quick command to sort of get our development environment set up. For M1, because we tend to use a standardized set of modules, we were also using Modman for M1 to start to pull in things like AOE indexer or cron scheduler or things like that, so we can kind of have set modules that we use across projects. For M2, obviously we're using Composer to achieve a similar thing.
Right. So as a freelance developer, I just tend to work with whatever my customer agency works with. So mostly Vagrant boxes, to be honest, at the moment. For my own stuff, I like to go bare metal on my OS X laptop. So I use Homebrew. I can easily switch between any PHP version. It's quick. I use Nginx or Apache, or both with PHP FPM, Varnish, and I got a bunch of self-grown bash scripts. That's where I feel at home. Works really well for me, and that's how I like to work.
Vagrant, mainly because I like to break things.
Definitely Docker. So Vagrant was last year. But no, with what we're finding with continuous delivery and deployment, Docker just makes sense because we can build these assets or these Dockerized containers. We've got the assets and the database in them, and it's the same that we're working on locally. We can just scale it up in the cloud. And with the advancements with the Docker beta, it's making that a lot easier.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking of, once it leaves beta, actually changing my local setup to that. But, well, not yet.
Yeah, I've been trying it, actually. It's pretty cool. But, yeah, I don't know when they're looking to get out of that. Are they on something like Beta 10 or something like that, the latest release? Looks interesting.
Definitely, but I'm not in a hurry. I'm quite happy, actually, where I'm at, so good.
Cool. Okay, any sort of related questions there? Yep. Well, new, that's fine.
Joshua Warren tweeted that a Magento 2 build took 85% of the time of an equivalent Magento 1 build. Have any of you found that to be similar or different?
I think people are finding the level of effort. It kind of depends. I mean, I'm actually going to stop by my old agency where I got my start, Blue Acorn, on Monday, because they're seeing a little bit longer development time than I would expect, and I'd like to kind of dig into that some. So Josh and the team at Creativity they're a wonderful organization. They're technically proficient. He is not prone to, I don't know if you have this term in the UK, bullshit. But I mean, I believe what he's saying. Internally, what we found was that when we were doing, so we actually wanted to test this ourselves, as we often do. We took some of our best and brightest engineers and had them sort of satisfy, complete a job requirement, right? So they got started on M2 fresh, and the first time they built something, it's like 1.5 the times of a Magento, basically the same thing in Magento 1. Second time was like 1.2, and then the third time it actually was less time. And of course, it's not exactly apples to apples comparison anymore, because you're probably going to be spending some time writing some test coverage, and of course, that will help down the road. So that there's a lot of time that you're going to save, but it won't be the same kind of time that you're saving with Magento 1.
Yeah, I think that mimics what we saw. So we've put 2 sites live now with the same team pretty much that worked on both of them. And the first project started off quite slow because we were trying to learn Magento 2. We were trying to understand how it worked, how to fix things that we've broken quite frequently. But the second project, because it follows a similar template, we knew how to look for the collections. We made sure that we used the interfaces, and that helped us when we were upgrading our Magento version not to break. So I think once you've got over that cost of learning, which you'll get if you swap between, say you wanted to learn a brand new language and you learn Java to do your e-commerce, it'd still cost quite a lot of money to learn up front the Java syntax, but then you get settled into your application. So we're seeing that decrease a little bit.
Yeah, I think the first thing is for M1 projects, we'd already know if the client said, I want to do X, we already knew which module we were going to go to do that functionality, or we knew we'd probably already built something that we could pull in. So I think, a key step is making sure you're ready for it in terms of having your tools and your processes kind of in place for that. The second thing is in terms of trying to speed up development time, there's some really good tools. So we've updated Joshua Warren's Magento 2 learning resources. So you've got Alan Storm's released a new version of Commerce Bug for Magento 2 specifically. You've also got Magento now that supports Magento 2. And there's actually a PHP Storm auto-completion module as well now for Magento 2. So you can find all of those up on the GitHub project. So if you are working on a Magento 2 build, that should help to speed you along.
Yeah, our core team has created, and I hope are still maintaining, but has created a PHP Storm plugin. Trying to do some coordination with Enrique, who is the person behind Magento, to make sure that we're not really doubling effort. And then just also something to be aware of is the code migration tools under our GitHub account that can take M1 code and just do a lot of the low level. This is how layout files are defined in M1 and converting that to M2. For example, it'll do a lot of that work for you theoretically. Again, it's on GitHub, so if you have if you find any problems or you find some missing functionality, of course, pull requests are encouraged.
So I haven't done a full build of a site yet, only modules and a bunch of trainings, but my experience has been that the common tasks are handled quicker in Magento 2 than Magento 1. However, the expensive part is the learning. Right after that, it's pretty much cookie cutter.
Okay, great. Any more questions?
Hi guys. This is about the front end in Magento 2. The front end in Magento 1 has always been just a few CSS files and JavaScript files and some jQuery sort of thing. And prototype. Yeah, I hate to say that, but still I'm saying it. And in Magento 2, we got a whole lot of other frameworks in there, like Angular and Backbone, and obviously Knockout on the front end, heavily used. Basically, does this mean the back-end developer has to learn a bit more of these frameworks, or does it open up new front-end developer breeds who can learn more into the JavaScript front-end and do a headless Magento development?
So before we let the obvious person answer this question, front end, what the hell are you people doing these days? It's really like the front end workflow is amazingly robust. And so front end for us is kind of a bit of that's an area of learning for us. So really want to encourage anyone, if you have input on it, you'll see that even our approach is evolving over time. I know Alan Kent has been chatting on about introducing SAS, preferring SAS over less, because that's overwhelmingly what the community wants. And so I think that yes, there is a new breed. Like it is possible to get very technical as a front end developer, and we kind of built Magento 2 to satisfy two roles, essentially. One where you do have that really rich, deep stack, and you can actually do some really complex, interesting things that should save you work. But we also wanted to satisfy the front end developer, like if I had to sit down and do it, which really don't ever hire me to do that. But essentially those are the two we were trying to work on, and I don't know that we got them perfectly right, because we're hearing a lot about the complexity of front end. So that's where we are. That's kind of the foundation on which I'll let Ian answer.
So we had this conversation actually internally at work. So when you start to look at a couple of areas of Magento 2, specifically around the checkout, there's some quite advanced JavaScript that's going on there. So whilst back-end developers have also got a massive task in terms of getting up to speed with Magento 2, there's also going to be quite a lot of learnings for the front-end developers, specifically around JavaScript. There aren't a massive amount of good front-end JavaScript-related tools for Magento 2 yet. specifically in terms of training, but Suresh, I know, is going to be looking at putting some bits and pieces together. So if anybody else knows of any good resources for Magento 2 JavaScript front-end training, then by all means put it up into Joshua's Guild project.
I wasn't even aware of Joshua's GitHub product, so thanks, I'll check that out.
And by the way, I'm not just texting away up here. I'm actually writing down questions and some of these responses because that's the kind of good stuff that we get to take back into Magento. Just thought you should know.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.
My question is that with Magento University, it's quite expensive for someone who to go in and pay the price like 3,000 for 5 days for fundamental. So, are there any breakdowns with those payments? And secondly, if you go open source, if you search on the web for module, because I'm a guy who is jumping from WordPress front-end theme site to Magento, like totally Magento, and I see that while I can create module, but there isn't any much resource on the net that's make anything more than Hello World modules. So something that really gets into deep into like PHP and stuff like that.
So let me restate. So you're kind of asking about. I think you mentioned the price tag. Did you mention the price tag of the training? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pricey, especially depending on the market. And then I think you also mentioned you're really kind of asking for sort of like good resources, simple modules to follow along with. Did I get that second part right?
Yeah.
Okay. It's changed a lot since when I had to. Yeah, I kept hounding this guy in IRC on Freenode and the Magento channel to like, hey man, what's that layout XML stuff? It's scary. It's scary in there. XML's scary. And he, this is back in 2008, and there was nothing. I mean, you had basically two places you could go for information: Alan Storm's blog and Inchu's blog. And even the guys at Inchu will say, yeah, we got some stuff wrong with our first post, right? But that was all you had. And that was back in the days when Magento was auto-corrected to Magneto. Like every time you searched for it. I mean, it's like, that's how we knew Magento had kind of arrived when all of a sudden I looked and Google was no longer trying to auto-correct it. So for me, I've always pointed out. So you've got two needs there. You've got the needs of learning some proper PHP MVC, which is something that, as we were discussing earlier, I like to, when I was hiring manager and director of development at Blue Acorn, I really like to take the new CS grads who evidently they don't teach you anything in university, at least they don't in the States, and have them build their own little PHP MVC apps, right? So they could really get into the parts and pieces and some of the challenges that have to be solved. That's one step, because I think you have to get that conceptually before you can really appreciate they're pretty interesting and cool ways that Magento solves that problem. Always remember that Magento is Magento 1, Magento 2, they're two things. They are a framework first. Take all that commerce stuff out, and you're left with a PHP MVC MVVM app, framework. And then, Magento Varian used that to build an e-commerce application with. But there's even a Magento Lite project out there that is essentially Magento without all the commerce stuff. Now, in Magento 2, it's even better, right? In Magento 2, the framework is completely abstracted away. Like anytime you need the view, that's part of the dependency chain. So you could actually really make the case that Magento 2 is a framework unto itself, even more so than Magento 1. So appreciating, 1, PHP, 2, appreciating how Magento does MVC, that's how you should tackle that problem. And then there are, Alan Storm has a ton of examples on his site, and there are sort of countless others out there, I think, for M1. And I would expect that they'll be filled in, continue to be filled in with M2.
Yeah, I think that's just the same. Alan Storm's blog's really good, especially for the Magento 2 quickies. I know me, Alan, and Fabrizio have got some ideas for Magento 2 on Mage casts. So when we get time to actually publish them, they'll all be out there. Vinay's amazing series is worth watching, especially for learning Magento 2 development. So I'll let him talk about that.
So I would say if you're starting learning with Magento 2, you've got to have some of that additional pain of being right at the forefront of a new product. It hurts. Sometimes it's just not where it should be, but it's already changing. And it was the same with Magento 1 when it got released, and that's just how it is. Now, I've seen a bunch of books already been released. Obviously, they have been written while Magento was in beta, and I applaud the effort, and they're good resources. However, when I open them up and just browse through them quickly, it's like, okay, yeah, that's different now. Oh, okay, that will cause a problem when you compile the code to production. Oh, okay. It's just in there because it's new. That's just how it is. So right now, you just have to kind of take the leap and start digging. And that's actually a guy called Lee Sepharite gave me that, recommendation back in the day in 2008. Same time, I was asking Ben about stuff, it's kind of just, we helped each other out. And I always was amazed how this guy Lee knew everything. He knew everything, right? How did he do it? I couldn't. And he told me to kind of read the core code. And I really wanted to be able to do that. I wanted to be as good as him in knowing and understanding what's actually happening. And it took me a while. It was really hard to understand what's happening. Here they do something, and then here they do something that affects this. And, it took some time. But reading what's happening and just spending the time trying to understand it, that's actually what I think helps understand how the product works. And the good thing about that is it's always right, because the code never lies, right? Like a book or a blog post or something. So that would be my recommendation. Just start digging and don't be afraid to waste some time. I guess that's what it boils down to, yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry. So some more other quick resources. So there is a GitHub project with lots of Magento sample modules, so you can use that. You can step through that. Again, if you've got Commerce Bug, is relatively inexpensive. Once you've got that installed, if you want to see what layout handles are rendered on a page, you've got a quite nice, easy way of debugging that. And there's also around 5 books that have been published, which are a good starting point. I think Alan Kent's got 2, which are around like 99p. Unfortunately, they're Kindle only, but 99p, if you've got a Kindle, it's well worth the money.
Yeah, and I would be remiss to not point out that we have code samples as far as learning M2. We have code samples under our GitHub account. They may be showing a little bit of age as well, right? So that may be part of the problem, but that's also something we know is quite important. But really, can't stress enough. Like, I'm gonna get in trouble for saying this. Everyone's gonna tweet it, but pain is good, right? Get all the phones coming. But it's true. It's like if we come up with the perfect free curriculum and just find a dashing spokesperson to get up there and talk and make bad puns about the code and all this stuff and explains everything perfectly, it won't stick. You won't internalize it the way you will poring over the code, like Vinay has suggested. And then I had one more thing, but I'm just knackered, so I forgot it.
I'd just like to echo those sentiments there about digging into the code, particularly around Magento 1. We found at Space 48 using XDebug to be able to step through the actual execution has been really valuable as to understand how the code is playing together and where it can jump around and delve into the areas. Really did move us forward in terms of the understanding in the early days. And Commerce Bug, again, that Ian mentioned, particularly around understanding the front end, being able to understand layout handles and actually see that feedback there and then. And also, actually, the dev docs. There's been a significant amount of effort by Magento to give us this documentation, and it's open, right? They've got that on GitHub. If you're going in there and you spot a problem, raise an issue, have a pull request. We can add to the value of that documentation. So the next person going in there is getting that little extra value. And if you've got an idea as to how perhaps you've gone through an article and it didn't quite click with you, and then eventually when you've got through to it, you think, I understand it now. Maybe raise an issue saying, well, it'd be great if you explained this or this way, or they are receptive.
Yeah, and so that was yes.
That was the thing, right?
I would be really remiss. We have an entire team of technical writers. Turns out, if you hire technical writers, it increases the likelihood that technical stuff will get written.
Who knew?
M1 was all about. Well, it's every developer story, right? Deadlines are coming up. I'll write the documentation later. And one other thing did pop into my head. One of the interesting things that you can do once you get to a certain point is actually look at the tooling that's been built. Now, you should be clear. Especially in Magento 2, you absolutely have to have a proper IDE and some kind of means for step debugging. It's just simply being able to control-click your way through this inheritance hierarchy. It's imperative. But in addition to that, if you want to learn about how Magento is architected, look at the tooling that's been built and look at how the authors of those tools, things like Commerce Bug from Alan Storm, look at how that code is sort of taking its meta level view of the Magento architecture.
Just thought of one more thing that's really helpful for learning, and that is teaching. Namely, answering questions on the forum or on GitHub or on Stack Exchange or anywhere, right? Coworkers. It's nothing beats starting to answer and then having to scramble to, follow up on it. So it's incredible tool for learning.
Literally, any bloke with a psychology degree can become a Magento persona in that manner. I promise you.
That was a good question. Any more from the audience?
Hi. So James mentioned in his talk that there was a good reason behind Magento actually writing their own DI. I was wondering if you could touch base on that a bit more.
Yeah, definitely. I've got the answer from GitHub where I can't remember his name. Anton actually explains why, and he's gone into it over a beer a few times. So they started using the Zen 2 implementation, and the Zen 2 one stopped. It was no longer in a place, so they tried to fork it and use that as their base. But it didn't quite work out for how they wanted it to work because it was a service container or a service locator, not a service container. They had to invent their own way of it working, not invent their own way, but build their own functionality to allow it to use the XML files and locate all the different XML notations that would be used.
Yeah, just one part I noticed is performance. So because the object manager is being used like the most used part of Magento 2, when regardless what's happening, it will every little benefit they can squeeze out of it will benefit the application as a whole quite a bit. It scales. So one place where that shows is the number of features they include or don't include. So I was missing one feature, for example, sorting array argument items by adding another DI XML file, and they didn't include that as a feature on purpose. And they're like, yeah, we thought about it, but we decided not to because sorting the arguments takes too much time. Like, wow, okay. Good reason, I guess. So I'll have to do without. So yeah, I think performance, because all the other DI containers, because they're frameworks, they're like abound with features. And the Magento one does exactly what it's meant to do, but not more.
Yeah, the canonical answer for this question actually is on GitHub and the thread that James mentioned. It's one of the more recent things. Actually, was it the all caps like Magento 2 is like Magento 2 is not Magento 2. It's like something completely new. We ended up closing and locking the thread because it obviously wasn't a very good thing to begin with. But the discussion was okay, and some guy jumped in from some company somewhere and started giving us some shit about this issue. And it's a fair question, but Anton's answer is exactly what you've heard up here. We tried to do a lot of things. We even looked at replacing, at trying to get rid of ZF1, right? because you don't want people to say, oh, well, look at what you're using, this old stuff. But we don't use very much of the Zen framework, and what we did use, to my recollection, when we looked at replacing like the select object, the query object, with ZF2 analog, it actually slowed the system down, and just there weren't enough benefits there. But it really is because that object manager is being used so heavily. We had to have that. That is one piece to have bespoke. I mean, honestly, it would be fantastic if you had something like that built into the language of PHP, because we're really built this sort of meta level piece, but it doesn't make sense. It doesn't really belong in PHP, the language. So find that thread. It's a great answer from Anton, who is our sort of our main architect for underneath Alan Kent.
Any more questions? No? Okay, I'll go back to one of the ones that were tweeted. How do you think that Magento Enterprise Cloud will affect developers?
I'm guessing that question, I'm doing a lot of talking, but I'm guessing that question is pretty much for me. Positively, right? I mean, if we're building it correctly, it's good. It's a win. In fact, it's a great win because we are probably removing some of the noise. And when I say noise, I'm talking about that DevOps area that you have to get into. We also have some tremendous, God, I'm starting to sound like Donald Trump. We've got the greatest cloud. Everyone else's cloud sucks. We're going to build a wall around our cloud. It's not even funny anymore.
Please don't let him in, by the way.
You may have. I already like Marmite, so I might as well just move here. If you saw, I mean, we've got this nice, pretty stack diagram of like what we've put together and the kinds of technologies that we're including in it. But we're working closely with some tech vendors to make sure that they have that their tooling is adapted specifically for Magento. So things like New Relic and Blackfire, right? We are engaging with these partnerships so that people can, so that the developers can actually do their work easier, because we know that has to be part of the value proposition to get people to buy in to the platform. We want people on. If cloud is the right thing for you, there really shouldn't be any reason to not be on it. I'll put it that way.
So I just had a brief demo and quick play around with it at Imagine at the booth. And from the big thing about Cloud Edition, I guess, is that everybody still owns their own code. So it's basically their own. So from a developer's perspective, I've got a Git repository, right? I'll do my development. I can do it wherever I want to. But every branch that I push automatically is an instance that's provisioned. So I could work there or I could work locally. And I guess that's a good thing. I think as a developer, it will help that probably the stack that I'm working on will be kind of de facto standardized. And that won't only be for Magento Cloud Edition projects, but I expect that to be kind of flow down market pretty much everywhere. So the stacks will be more similar than with Magento 2, with Magento 1, than with Magento 1. When I'm working on Magento 1 projects, normally every company and every merchant has their own deployment process and their own stack and their own hosting style and versions, and it's quite unique every time I have to look at it. So I expect that to be more similar with Magento 2, which I guess is kind of nice.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of like, I need a staging environment. Boop. I mean, I don't know if it'll make that sound, but basically that's what we're, there's the kinds of things that we want to, we just want to turn the noise down on being a developer. Like, you should just be able to sit down, write your code, and it should just work. That's our vision. And again, that's why we built things the way we built. And right now, while it's targeted at sort of a kind of the higher end in the enterprise space, you will see the offering in some form come downstream. And I want to stress that what Vinay said, it literally is like you are working with code like you expect to work with code. You are working with Magento, a Magento version that is the Magento version. It's not customized for cloudiness. I don't know if we should let Pam speak, but
I'm interested to understand. You're saying that you're taking away that DevOps pain from a developer. Are you not then de-skilling people? Because essentially, shouldn't they want to understand the environments in which they're working?
Good question. When I find myself wanting to satisfy job requirements, well, when I worked for a living, when I find myself wanting to satisfy job requirements, right, and actually, and I did that by writing code. Understanding a problem, writing code. That was the scope of my work. Now, if I wanted to understand, and at some point, you can't be, of course, you don't operate in a total silo. I mean, if you're writing, bad, essentially stuff that leads to really non-performant queries, that's a problem. So at some point, you do have to still have some awareness of this stuff. The cool thing is, in our world, you should have the tooling to sit there and realize immediately, like whether it's through automated testing, that, oh wow, this thing that I wrote functionally is great, but I've just slowed my website. I've slowed down this flow by some percentage. So again, I think right now we actually place too much burden on what a developer has to know in order to do their work. That's we can get dogmatic about it. That's my opinion. It's right, but I'll let the other guys also chime in.
Sorry, I seem to be speaking a lot, but so you still have to know Varnish, you still have to know HTTP, you still have to know AMQP if that's in a project, you'll still have to know SQL, like you said, you still have to know the JavaScript stack. So there's plus the PHP, plus all the principles behind that. So, what's not there? The stuff that changes a lot, like Docker or Vagrant or whatever. I don't miss that, to be honest. You need to know Git good because it's all based around the Git workflow process there.
Yeah, as an agency, probably one of the blockers all the time is if we're working with a client on a continued basis as part of some retained work, and the client comes to us and says, hey, I want to do a project, I want to roll our Magento store out into another country, for example. The lead time to us getting an environment available from systems administrators can sometimes be quite long, and we don't want to delay the client because we've got some sort of internal blockages. So from being able to free up our system administrators and being able to have sort of environments available per branch, we find very attractive to us. The other part around de-skilling people, well, Magento Enterprise Cloud isn't going to be everything that we do. We're still going to have sites that we own, and we're still going to have sites that we support. So if anything, it does kind of free up our, whether you want to call them DevOps or sysadmins, to help to support clients that we are supporting more. So rather than spending the time spinning up environments, we can be looking at some really technical issue with a site that's struggling under load, or debugging something, as opposed to just spinning up another environment so that developers can get started.
Yeah, that's exactly what we found. So we've got enterprise clients at the minute that aren't going to use the enterprise cloud because they want to own their own bare metal. So we've still got our DevOps team that are going to specialize specifically in bespoke DevOps solutions, the Ansible, Chef, Docker of the world. That I could spend a lot of time trying to learn Ansible and DevOps, but it's probably not the best value for me as a PHP software engineer. So we're still going to keep our DevOps team there, and they're going to be great for some of our enterprise clients. And the time that they might not have to spend now working on the enterprise cloud, they're going to invest that time back into building tools locally for us for provisioning our local environments, to make our code provisioning into other areas a little bit faster. So a little bit so far with a tool that we've got called Hem that they've built because of the time that we've been using Amazon Cloud. And I think just using platform.sh, which is something that we've used for a while, it opens up the possibility for developers a great deal, but it also means that continuous integration is starting to be more of a possibility. Being able to showcase branches of code to people faster is something that for a normal DevOps to get working on Rackspace, DigitalOcean, or UK Fast, it's probably quite a lot more engaging to build this complete bespoke solution to push branches live than what Magento has done.
But to be honest, thinking a bit further, you are right. I mean, some things we won't have to learn anymore. So that is de-skilling. Is it critical? I don't think so, but in some things, yeah. So just wanted to amend that because I was like, no, it's all good. Well, maybe not.
It's an interesting thing to consider, but I mean, I look at it in terms of it's as opposed to, so it's time for rosy metaphors, as opposed to spending the time putting out fires or just trying to keep the stoves on. Really being able to focus that energy and say, okay, let's make it hot over here. Let's make it hot over here. Really being able to find the best use of the time. And I will say, if we're building this product correctly, what happens over time is as we get some data about development, about store executions. I mean, basically, the more insight we're getting from this, the better we should be at building the product and making great product decisions. And that's not just for the merchant or their customer. It's also for the developers and the agencies that have to work with this stuff.
Okay, I think we've probably got just enough time for one more question if anybody's got one. No? Oh.
Hi. So I was wondering, what would you value more, consistency or best practices? For example, with Magento 2, the front end is breaking some of the best practices. There's some variables, a colour that's named colour grain 95. So there's potentially 90 odd grey variables. Should I make grey 100 or break the consistency and use my own?
Good question. So, I mean, there are a couple of bugs with Magento 2 at the moment. There's also another bug around static content deploy, so it's going to try and sort of compile every theme that it knows about, even if you're not using it. So, yes, these things are being worked on. In answer to your question, it depends on what you want to do, really. I don't want to really answer that one for you.
It's a great question. It's the best question. At least I get to milk that for a while. It is a good question because it helps. It illuminates a reality right now, which is that we've built this thing, and if you talk to the engineers, the team behind some of the stuff you're talking about, like how our variables, especially our custom sort of our customizations, which is part of the reason why we went with less. We have this in our head, like, this is probably how this works, and the story of how, basically, I think you're right that it will at times be a slightly personal story, but what's missing right now is that body of experience where people just know. It's that sort of that cultural context of code, right? Where you just know, like, I mean, you can do it that way, but you see all these other people have done it this way, and it leads to this set of problems. So we're still at that pioneering sort of pain-loving edge, where the community is actually giving us this input and helping us sort of find these edges. We might make some bigger product decisions based on that, again, like less versus SaaS, but over time, I think this question that we ask now will be a question that we don't ask, a year from now.
Sorry, one other point. So the Snowdog apps blank SaaS theme that we spoke about earlier. So that's up on GitHub. So have a look at what they're doing in there. If it is broken in there, send them a pull request. And obviously, because it's using Composer as well, you don't even have to leave your Magento project to pull that in. To run a simple Composer command, it's available to you, and then you can extend that and go from there. And it's written in SAS.
Great question. I like decoupling my stuff from framework code, and because it protects me against such inconsistencies. Now, of course, there's a benefit in using core code or pre-made functionality that saves time. So it's always a choice between, okay, I'll do it I'll roll my own, and I can do it my way and it'll work even if they change their stuff later or if there are bugs, or using their stuff there, which might break in future. So I guess if the functionality is stable, I would be more likely to use the stuff. If I find inconsistencies or bugs there, I would be more likely to roll my own and just use that, because that's bound to work forever, right? So,
thank you.
Can I have a big round of applause for the panel?